In the grand halls of Kensington Palace, where tradition meets modern royal life, a single question from an innocent child would shatter the composure of one of Britain's most disciplined protectors. What could a 5-year-old prince possibly ask that would bring a seasoned royal guard to tears? This is the true story of how Prince Louis's innocent curiosity exposed the hidden fears that even the bravest among us carry, and how one moment of vulnerability became a testament to the power of human connection across the boundaries of duty, protocol, and social standing. Sometimes the most profound truths come from the mouths of children, delivered without filter or pretense. On this particular autumn morning in 2024, young Prince Louis would ask a question that would echo through the corridors of the palace, touch the hearts of millions, and remind us all that beneath every uniform, every title, and every role we play, beats the heart of someone who simply wants to feel safe and valued in this world. The autumn morning mist clung to the windows of Kensington Palace as Sergeant Michael Harrison adjusted his red tunic one final time before taking his position. At 42 years old, he had served the crown for over 2 decades, first in the Queen's Guard and now as part of the elite protection detail for the Wales family. His weathered hands, marked by years of military service, smoothed the gold braiding on his uniform with practiced precision. Michael had seen 3 generations of royals pass through these halls. He remembered standing guard when Prince William was just a boy, not much older than Prince Louis was now. The weight of responsibility had never felt heavier than it did these days, with the constant media attention, security threats, and the delicate balance of protecting the future of the monarchy while allowing the children to experience something resembling a normal childhood. The morning began like any other. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, emerged from the family quarters with her characteristic grace, followed by Prince George, who was adjusting his school tie with the careful precision of a 12-year-old trying to look mature. Princess Charlotte bounded down the stairs 2 at a time, her school bag bouncing against her hip, chattering excitedly about a project she was working on about marine biology. But it was Prince Louis who caught Michael's attention that morning. The 5-year-old appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his small hand gripping the ornate banister as he made his way down each step with deliberate care. There was something different about his demeanor today, something that made Michael's trained eye narrow slightly with concern. As the family's protection officer, Michael had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when one of the children might be troubled. Prince Louis, usually a bundle of energy who would slide down the banister or hop from step to step, was moving with unusual solemnity. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, seemed to be searching for something, or perhaps someone. The morning routine proceeded as usual. Breakfast was served in the informal dining room, where the family gathered around a table that, while still grand by most standards, felt intimate compared to the state dining rooms used for official functions. Catherine reviewed the day's schedule with her private secretary while Prince William, who had returned late the previous evening from an official engagement in Scotland, caught up on the morning's newspapers. Michael stood at his designated position near the entrance to the dining room, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings while remaining alert to the family's needs. It was a delicate balance, being present enough to ensure their safety while being invisible enough to allow them privacy. Over the years, he had perfected this art of protective invisibility. As breakfast concluded, the older children gathered their school bags and headed toward the door where their cars waited. Prince George paused to say goodbye to his mother with the slightly embarrassed affection of a preteen, while Princess Charlotte gave both parents enthusiastic hugs before racing toward the door. Prince Louis, however, remained seated at the table, his small fingers tracing patterns on the white tablecloth. Catherine noticed his reluctance to move and knelt beside his chair, her voice gentle as she asked what was wrong. "I don't want to go to school today, Mama," Louis said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed far too heavy for such small shoulders. Catherine's maternal instincts immediately sharpened. "Why not, darling? Are you feeling unwell?" Louis shook his head, his gaze drifting toward Michael, who remained at attention near the doorway. "I'm scared," he whispered, so quietly that Michael had to strain to hear the words. The admission hung in the air like a delicate butterfly, beautiful and fragile and demanding careful handling. Catherine followed her son's gaze toward Michael, and, in that moment, The protection officer felt the weight of those innocent eyes settling on him like a physical presence. "What are you scared of, my love?" Catherine asked, her voice maintaining the calm, reassuring tone that had comforted her children through countless moments of uncertainty. Lewis's eyes remained fixed on Michael as he spoke. "The bad people," he said simply. "The ones who want to hurt us." The words cut through the morning calm like a blade. Catherine felt her heart clench as she realized that despite their best efforts to shield their youngest child from the darker realities of their position, some understanding of the dangers they faced had still managed to penetrate his consciousness. Michael felt his chest tighten as he watched this private moment unfold. He had dedicated his life to ensuring that this family could live as normally as possible, that these children could experience joy and freedom without fear. Yet here was proof that his presence, the very security measures meant to protect them, had become a source of anxiety for the little boy he was sworn to guard. Prince William, who had been quietly observing the exchange, moved to join Catherine beside Lewis's chair. His approach was casual, but Michael could see the tension in the prince's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened slightly as he processed his son's words. "Lewis," William said gently, settling into the chair beside his youngest child. "Can you tell us more about what's frightening you?" The little prince glanced between his parents, then back toward Michael. "There are always people watching us," he said, his voice gaining a bit more strength. "And they have to watch us because there are people who might try to hurt us. But what if the watchers get hurt trying to protect us?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. In all his years of service, through countless security briefings and threat assessments, he had never considered how his presence might be interpreted by the very people he was protecting. He had thought of himself as a reassuring presence, a symbol of safety. The possibility that a child might see him and think not of protection but of danger had never occurred to him. Catherine reached out to take Lewis's small hand in hers. "The people who protect us are very good at their jobs, sweetheart. They're trained to keep everyone safe. But what if they're not safe?" Lewis persisted, his eyes now locked directly on Michael's face. "What if something happens to them because they're trying to help us?" The question echoed in the sudden silence of the dining room. Even the usual sounds of the palace seemed to fade away as the weight of the child's concerns settled over everyone present. Michael felt his throat tighten as he realized that this innocent boy had somehow understood something that many adults failed to grasp, that protection was a two-way street, that those who served carried their own vulnerabilities and fears. For the first time in his career, Michael found himself fighting to maintain his professional composure. The idea that this child was worrying about his safety, rather than simply accepting it as a given, touched something deep within him that he had carefully locked away years ago. Prince Louis slid down from his chair and walked slowly toward Michael, his small feet making soft sounds on the marble floor. Catherine and William watched in silence as their youngest child approached the man who had been a constant presence in their lives, yet remained largely invisible to them in his professional capacity. Michael felt his training warring with his human instincts as the little prince stopped directly in front of him. Protocol dictated that he maintain his position and bearing, but the earnest concern in the child's eyes made it difficult to remain completely detached. "Are you scared sometimes?" Louis asked, looking up at Michael with the direct honesty that only children possess. The question hung in the air between them, simple and profound and utterly impossible to answer according to any protocol manual ever written. Michael looked down into Prince Louis's earnest face, feeling the weight of 20 years of military discipline warring with the simple human truth of the moment. The question hung between them like a bridge spanning two very different worlds, one of duty and protocol, the other of genuine human concern. Sometimes, Michael heard himself say, his voice quieter than usual, "Everyone gets a little scared." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. In all his years of service, he had never broken character, never allowed personal feelings to intrude on his professional duties. But something about the innocent sincerity in the little prince's eyes made deception impossible. Louis nodded solemnly, as if this confirmation of shared human frailty made perfect sense to him. "When I get scared, Mama says it's okay to talk about it. Do you have someone to talk to when you're scared?" The question hit Michael with unexpected force. He thought of his small flat in South London, where he returned each evening to silence and solitude. He thought of the carefully constructed walls he had built around his emotions, the professional distance he maintained from everyone around him. Who did he talk to? The honest answer was no one. Catherine and William watched this exchange with growing fascination and concern. They had worked with security personnel for their entire lives, but never had they witnessed such a moment of genuine human connection between their child and one of their protectors. The carefully maintained boundaries that defined these relationships were dissolving before their eyes. "That's a very thoughtful question, Louis," Catherine said gently, moving closer to where her son stood with Michael. "Mr. Harrison works very hard to keep us safe." "But who keeps him safe?" Louis asked, turning back to his mother but keeping one hand pointed toward Michael. "If he gets hurt because of us, who will help him feel better?" The innocence of the question belied its profound implications. Michael felt his chest tighten as memories he had long suppressed began to surface. He thought of his military service in Afghanistan, of the friends he had lost, of the nights he lay awake wondering if his dedication to protecting others was worth the isolation it had brought to his own life. Prince William stood and approached them, his expression thoughtful. As someone who had served in the military himself, he understood the unique psychological challenges that came with a life dedicated to protecting others. He had seen how the weight of responsibility could isolate someone, how the need to appear strong and unshakable could become a prison. "Louis is asking some very important questions," William said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had wrestled with similar concerns. "Mr. Harrison, if I may ask, how long have you been with our family?" 7 years, Your Royal Highness," Michael replied, grateful for a question that fell within the bounds of normal professional interaction. "And before that?" 15 years military service, sir, including 3 tours in Afghanistan." William nodded, understanding passing across his features. "That's a long time spent taking care of others. Louis makes a good point about who takes care of you." The conversation was veering into territory that made Michael profoundly uncomfortable. He had spent his entire adult life deflecting personal questions, maintaining professional boundaries, keeping his own needs and vulnerabilities carefully hidden. Yet here, in this elegant dining room, with a 5-year-old boy asking questions with the pure logic of childhood, those carefully constructed defenses were crumbling. Louis seemed oblivious to the adult's discomfort. With the fearlessness of youth, he pressed on with his inquiry. "Do you have a family? Someone who hugs you when you're sad?" The question landed like a physical blow. Michael's mind immediately went to Sarah, the woman he had been engaged to marry 8 years ago. She had loved him deeply, but eventually grew tired of competing with his job for his attention, tired of the walls he maintained even in their most intimate moments. The ring had been returned on a rainy Tuesday evening, along with words that still echoed in his memory. "I can't love someone who won't let me really know him." "Not anymore," Michael found himself saying, the words escaping before he could stop them. The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Michael immediately regretted the honesty, but Louis's response surprised him. "That makes me sad," the little prince said simply. "Everyone should have someone to hug them." Without warning or ceremony, Louis stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around Michael's legs in a spontaneous embrace. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to every protocol and boundary that defined their relationship, that Michael felt his carefully maintained composure finally begin to crack. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but in those moments, Michael felt the weight of years of emotional isolation pressing against his chest. He looked down at the small boy clinging to his legs, offering comfort with the generous heart that only children possess, and felt something break open inside him. Catherine watched this unprecedented scene with a mixture of maternal pride and growing concern for the clearly overwhelmed security officer. She had never seen one of their protection team display such obvious emotional distress, and her instincts told her that this moment was significant in ways that went far beyond protocol. "Mr. Harrison," she said softly, "perhaps you'd like to sit down for a moment?" Michael's training screamed against the suggestion. Security personnel didn't sit down during duty hours. They didn't accept comfort from those they were protecting. They certainly didn't allow their personal emotions to become visible. Yet his legs felt unsteady, and The concerned faces surrounding him made it clear that his usual defensive strategies were no longer working. "I should remain at my post, Your Royal Highness," he managed to say, though his voice sounded strained even to his own ears. "Nonsense," William said firmly. "Please, have a seat. Lewis, perhaps you could ask Mrs. Henderson to bring Mr. Harrison some tea." Lewis nodded eagerly, happy to have a concrete way to help, and scampered off toward the kitchen with the enthusiasm of a child on an important mission. His departure left the three adults in a silence that felt heavy with unspoken understanding. Michael reluctantly took a seat at the table, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to regain his composure. The familiar weight of his uniform, usually a source of pride and identity, now felt like a costume that no longer fit properly. "In my experience," William said quietly, settling into a chair across from Michael, "the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others often forget that they deserve protection too." The words hit Michael with the force of recognition. How many years had he spent focused entirely outward, watching for threats, assessing dangers, ensuring the safety of others while completely neglecting his own emotional and psychological needs? Catherine pulled a chair closer and sat down, her expression kind but determined. "Lewis has a gift for seeing things that adults sometimes miss. His question about who takes care of you isn't just idle curiosity. It's a very real concern. I chose this life," Michael said, trying to reassemble his professional demeanor. "I knew what it would require. Choosing to serve doesn't mean choosing to suffer in silence," William replied. "I learned that the hard way during my own military service. The people who care about duty and honor often struggle the most with asking for help when they need it." Michael felt the truth of those words settling in his chest like a weight he had been carrying for so long that he had forgotten it was there. When had he last had a conversation about anything other than security protocols and threat assessments? When had anyone asked about his well-being, his fears, his hopes for the future? Lewis returned with Mrs. Henderson, the family's housekeeper, who carried a tea service that she set down with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to adapting to unusual situations. As she poured tea into delicate china cups, Lewis climbed back onto his chair and fixed Michael with the same earnest attention that had started this entire interaction. "Are you feeling better now?" Lewis asked, his small face serious with concern. Michael looked at the little boy who had somehow seen past his uniform and his role to recognize his fundamental humanity. The question that had seemed so simple, "Who takes care of you?" had opened a door that Michael wasn't sure he was ready to walk through, but knew he couldn't close again. Michael accepted the delicate teacup from Mrs. Henderson with hands that weren't quite steady, acutely aware that everything about this moment violated every principle of professional conduct he had lived by for over 2 decades. Yet as he looked into Lewis's expectant face, he found himself unable to retreat back behind the familiar walls of protocol and emotional distance. "I'm trying to feel better," he answered honestly, surprised by his own willingness to continue this unprecedented conversation. Lewis nodded approvingly, as if this admission of ongoing struggle was exactly what he had hoped to hear. "Sometimes it takes a while," he said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children often possess. "When I fell off my bike and scraped my knee, it hurt for lots of days. Mama said healing takes time." The comparison between physical and emotional wounds struck Michael as surprisingly apparent. He had treated his isolation and emotional detachment as necessary professional tools, but perhaps they were more like untreated injuries that had never properly healed. Catherine watched this exchange with growing understanding. As a mother, she had learned to read the subtle signs of distress in both children and adults. The slight tremor in Michael's hands, the way his usual military bearing had softened into something more vulnerable, told her that they were witnessing the emergence of pain that had been carefully hidden for years. "Mr. Harrison," she said gently, "may I ask about your family? Do you have parents, siblings, anyone who worries about you?" The question opened another carefully sealed door in Michael's memory. He thought of his mother, who had died 3 years earlier, and how he had stood at her funeral in his dress uniform, accepting condolences from neighbors and distant relatives who knew him only as the son who works for the royal family. He thought of his father, who had passed away during his second tour in Afghanistan, and how he had missed the funeral because of his military deployment. My parents are gone, he said quietly. They both died while I was away on duty. I have a sister in Australia, but we lost touch years ago. She said the job had changed me, made me too distant to maintain a relationship with. The admission felt like removing armor that had grown so familiar he had forgotten he was wearing it. Lewis listened with the serious attention he usually reserved for his favorite bedtime stories, while Catherine and William exchanged glances that spoke of their growing concern for this man they had worked with for years but never really known. That sounds lonely, Lewis said simply, his small voice carrying a weight of understanding that seemed far beyond his 5 years. It is lonely, Michael found himself agreeing, the words escaping before he could censor them. But that's part of the job. I need to stay focused on protecting your family. Personal relationships can be distracting. William leaned forward, his expression serious. Michael, may I speak to you not as your employer, but as someone who understands the demands of service? Michael nodded, unsure where this conversation was leading but unable to find a way to gracefully retreat from it. I spent 7 years in the military, William continued. I understand the culture of sacrifice, the idea that putting others first means putting yourself last. But I learned something important during those years. You can't protect others effectively if you're not taking care of yourself. Isolation isn't strength. It's a vulnerability. The words resonated with something deep in Michael's chest, a recognition of truth that he had been avoiding for years. He thought of the nights when he lay awake, hypervigilant and unable to rest, constantly replaying scenarios and assessing potential threats. He thought of the way he scrutinized every person who approached the family, the exhausting mental calculations that never stopped, the weight of responsibility that followed him everywhere. When I was deployed, he said slowly, we had a saying, no one gets left behind. But somehow, when I came back to civilian life, I left myself behind. Catherine felt her heart clench at the raw honesty in his voice. She thought of her own children, of the security and love that surrounded them every day, and realized that the man responsible for ensuring their safety had been living without those fundamental human needs for years. Lewis, who had been listening with the intense focus he usually reserved for complicated new concepts, suddenly brightened with an idea. Maybe you could be part of our family, he suggested with the straightforward logic of childhood. Not like a real family, but like a chosen family. Mama says friends can be family too. The suggestion hung in the air, sweet and impossible and somehow exactly right. Michael felt his throat tighten as he contemplated this child's generous offer of inclusion, of belonging, of the very thing he had convinced himself he didn't need. That's a beautiful thought, Lewis, Catherine said softly, her eyes never leaving Michael's face. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, or the ones that choose us. Michael felt tears threatening for the first time in years. The careful emotional control that had served him through military combat, through loss, through years of isolation, was finally cracking under the gentle pressure of genuine human compassion. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't remember how to be part of anything other than the job. Maybe we could learn together, William suggested. Our family has its own unique challenges when it comes to balancing duty with personal connection. We might be able to help each other figure it out. The offer was unprecedented. In all his years of service, Michael had never heard of a working relationship evolving into something that resembled actual family connection. The very idea seemed to violate every principle of professional boundaries he had ever learned. Yet as he sat in this warm dining room, surrounded by people who were genuinely concerned about his well-being rather than just his performance, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. What would that look like? He asked, surprising himself with the question. Lewis immediately perked up, clearly delighted that his suggestion was being taken seriously. Well, you could eat breakfast with us sometimes. And maybe we could ask how you're feeling, not just about work stuff, but about real stuff. And when it's your birthday, we could have cake. The simplicity of the child's vision made Michael smile for the first time in the conversation. When is your birthday, Mr. Harrison? Catherine asked, realizing that despite working closely with this man for 7 years, she knew almost nothing about his personal life. December 15th, he replied automatically, then felt a flush of embarrassment as he realized the significance of the date. It's next week, actually. The silence that followed was heavy with shared realization. Here was a man who had spent 7 years dedicating himself entirely to their family's welfare, and none of them had even known when his birthday was. The oversight felt like a profound failure of basic human consideration. Next week, Catherine repeated softly. Michael, how are you planning to celebrate? The question revealed another layer of his isolation. I wasn't, he admitted. I don't really celebrate anymore. Lewis looked absolutely scandalized by this revelation. Everyone should celebrate their birthday, he declared with the fierce certainty of childhood. Birthdays are for being happy that you're alive. The innocence of the statement hit Michael with unexpected force. When had he stopped being happy that he was alive? When had birthdays become just another day to get through rather than occasions for gratitude and joy? Lewis is right, William said firmly. We're going to have to do something about that. The days that followed their morning conversation brought subtle but profound changes to the routine at Kensington Palace. Michael found himself noticing things he had previously overlooked. The way Lewis would catch his eye and offer a small wave each morning. How Catherine would ask about his well-being alongside the usual security briefings. How William would include him in conversations that went beyond professional necessities. It felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. After years of existing in the careful space between visibility and invisibility that defined his role, Michael was learning to navigate the unfamiliar territory of genuine human connection within his professional responsibilities. But the real test of this newfound openness was yet to come. December 15th dawned gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made London feel particularly dreary. Michael woke in his sparse apartment, as he had on every birthday for the past several years, with no plans beyond his regular duties and no expectations beyond getting through another day. He dressed in his uniform with the same meticulous care he always applied, but found himself pausing in front of the mirror longer than usual. 43 years old today. When he was young, he had imagined that by this age he would have achieved some measure of personal happiness alongside his professional success. Instead, he had dedicated himself so completely to service that he had forgotten what it felt like to be someone worth celebrating. The commute to Kensington Palace was routine, but Michael found himself thinking about Lewis's earnest declaration that birthdays were for being happy to be alive. The simple truth of it resonated in a way that surprised him. When had he last felt genuinely grateful for his existence, rather than simply dutiful about continuing it? He arrived at the palace to find the family already gathered for breakfast. But something seemed different about their energy. There was an undercurrent of excitement that Michael's trained instincts immediately picked up on, though he couldn't identify its source. Prince George and Princess Charlotte were whispering together in the way that suggested shared secrets, while Lewis kept glancing toward the dining room doors with barely contained anticipation. Catherine and William exchanged meaningful looks that spoke of plans in motion. Michael took his usual position near the entrance, scanning the room with professional efficiency while trying to ignore the unusual atmosphere. Perhaps there was a surprise planned for one of the children, or an unexpected guest arriving later in the day. These kinds of family conspiracies were not uncommon, and usually had nothing to do with him. It wasn't until Lewis suddenly jumped up from his chair and ran toward him that Michael realized he might be wrong. "Happy birthday, Mr. Harrison," Lewis announced loudly, his small face beaming with delight. "We didn't forget." The simple words hit Michael like a physical force. In all his years of service, through all the birthdays that had passed unmarked and uncelebrated, no one in his professional life had ever acknowledged the anniversary of his birth. The fact that this family had not only remembered, but clearly planned something felt overwhelming. "We have a surprise for you," Lewis continued, grabbing Michael's hand with the fearless affection he had displayed throughout their growing friendship. "But first, you have to sit down." Catherine approached with a gentle smile that carried warmth and something that looked surprisingly like maternal concern. "Michael, would you please join us for breakfast? We know it's not protocol, but some occasions call for breaking the rules." Michael felt his professional instincts warring with the invitation. Every aspect of his training told him to politely decline, to maintain his position and his boundaries. But the hopeful expression on Lewis's face made refusal impossible. "I would be honored," he heard himself say. the formal words unable to quite capture the emotion behind them. As he took a seat at the family table, Michael felt as if he were crossing a bridge into unfamiliar territory. The chair felt strange beneath him, the informal intimacy of the family breakfast unsettling after years of observing from a careful distance. Mrs. Henderson appeared with additional place settings and what appeared to be a specially prepared breakfast plate. As she set it before him, Michael noticed that the usual formal service had been replaced with something more personal. His favorite tea, which he hadn't realized anyone had noticed he preferred, and toast prepared exactly the way he liked it. "How did you know?" he asked, genuinely puzzled by the attention to details he hadn't thought anyone observed. "We've been paying attention," Catherine said with a smile. "You've been taking care of us for 7 years. It seemed about time we started taking care of you." Louis could barely contain his excitement as he watched Michael's reaction. "We asked Mrs. Henderson to watch what you like," he confided in the stage whisper that children use when sharing important secrets. "And Papa talked to your boss to make sure you could have breakfast with us today." Michael looked toward William, who nodded with the slight embarrassment of someone caught in an act of kindness. "I had a conversation with the security coordinator. Everyone agreed that flexibility in protocols sometimes serves the greater good." The realization that they had not only noticed his preferences but had actually coordinated with his supervisors to make this moment possible felt almost too significant to process. Michael had spent so many years being professionally invisible that the idea of being personally seen felt revolutionary. As breakfast progressed, the conversation flowed in ways that felt both natural and surreal. Princess Charlotte told him about her latest school project with the enthusiasm she usually reserved for family members. Prince George, normally shy around the security staff, asked about Michael's military service with genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. But it was Louis who provided the moment that would stay with Michael for the rest of his life. As Mrs. Henderson cleared the breakfast plates, Louis disappeared briefly and returned carrying something behind his back, his expression serious with the weight of an important mission. "We made you something," he announced, revealing a handmade card that was clearly the product of considerable effort and creativity. Princess Charlotte helped with the drawing, and Prince George wrote some of the words because his handwriting is better than mine. Michael accepted the card with hands that weren't entirely steady. The front featured a drawing that was unmistakably meant to be him, rendered in the bold, cheerful colors that children favored. He was depicted in his red uniform, but instead of the stern expression he usually wore, the drawing showed him smiling. Inside, in a mixture of Charlotte's careful script and George's more mature handwriting, was a message that made Michael's throat tighten with emotion. "Dear Mr. Harrison, thank you for keeping us safe every day. We are sorry we didn't know you before, but we are happy we know you now. You are brave and kind, and we like having you as part of our family. We hope your birthday is special because you are special. Love, Louis, Charlotte, George, and Mama, and Papa too." Michael stared at the card, reading the words over and over as their meaning settled into his consciousness. In his entire adult life, no one had ever called him special. No one had ever thanked him for his kindness rather than just his competence. No one had ever included him in their definition of family. "Do you like it?" Louis asked, his voice carrying the slight anxiety that comes with offering something precious and waiting to see if it will be valued. Michael looked up from the card to find 3 young faces watching him with eager hope, and 2 adult faces reflecting the same generous spirit that had made this moment possible. The weight of their collective care and attention felt almost too much to bear. "It's the most beautiful birthday gift I've ever received," he said, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer hide. "Thank you." But Louis wasn't finished. With the dramatic flair that came naturally to him, he announced, "And now for the really big surprise." What happened next would become the moment that finally broke through the last of Michael's carefully constructed defenses and brought him to tears in front of the family he had sworn to protect. Louis disappeared from the dining room with the purposeful energy of a child on an important mission, leaving the adults in a suspense that felt both anticipating and slightly apprehensive. Michael clutched the handmade card, still overwhelmed by the simple generosity of its message, while Catherine and William watched him with expressions that mixed satisfaction and concern. "Whatever Lewis has planned," William said quietly, "please know that it comes from a place of genuine affection. He's been thinking about this for days." Before Michael could respond, Lewis returned, but he wasn't alone. In his small hands, he carefully carried what appeared to be a framed photograph, holding it with the reverence usually reserved for precious treasures. "This is for you," Lewis announced solemnly, presenting the frame to Michael. "Papa helped me understand how to do it, but it was my idea." Michael accepted the frame with curiosity that quickly transformed into something much deeper. The photograph showed Lewis himself, grinning at the camera with his characteristic joy, but it wasn't the image that stopped Michael's breath. It was the inscription at the bottom, written in Lewis's careful 5-year-old handwriting. "For Mr. Harrison, so you have someone who loves you always. Love, Prince Louis." The simple words hit Michael with a force that 20 years of emotional armor couldn't deflect. This child, this precious, innocent boy who had worried about his safety, who had seen his loneliness and decided to do something about it, had just handed him the one thing he hadn't realized he was desperately missing: the assurance that he was loved. Michael stared at the photograph,